Dame Phemy, I think when you first meet her, she's just constantly on the go. She never stops for a minute. She has got a finger in every single situation that's going on. She rules that castle. She knows everything the king does. She knows everything the queen's doing. She knows everything that's coming in. She knows everything that's going out. And she's been kind of sidestepped. She hasn't been really informed that the visitors have arrived right there and then. So she's been kind of wrong-footed. And I think we see her wrong-footed all the way through the show until near the sort of 2/3 of the second half. But I think she's desperate to kind of maintain her position in the palace, and so therefore I think she finds anything new totally throws her. And the fact that she finds Dunbar in the castle in the first place, he has no right to be there. She doesn't know how he got in, and he's already causing her grief. So she dismisses him in an instant, and then she dismisses Peter, and then she comes across the two girls, and that becomes problematic for her.
For Anne, obviously, they thought they were going to England, the court of Henry VII, and then they ended up in Scotland. And at this point, they don't understand, there's a language barrier. So they think that they're prisoners until Peter tells them, no, you're free to work here. And for Anne especially, it's like the stress of seeing all these other characters looking at her, and there's a conflict right at the start between Dame Phemy and Anne just because of her attitude, because she's got all her fingers in everyone's business. She does rule the castle in a way, and it's like for Anne especially because she also sees herself quite up there, and meeting another woman who is up there, it's a bit of a who are you? So yeah, it's like the journey of thinking you are something, thinking you're somewhere, and then being completely flipped. Your reality is completely flipped and force-fed to you.
Because I was in James 1, 2 and 3, I've had a really long association with the project from 2014. And when the James IV was about to go into some kind of production, and that it felt like as if there was a production that was going to happen, we had a workshop, which is really nice. That's something that actors sometimes get involved in. And it's a kind of a chance for the writer to probably hear the piece out loud. And just because you do the workshop doesn't necessarily mean that you'll end up doing the play. It's often that you don't, and that you're maybe part of that really initial process. And whether the piece actually evolves into something that they can work on, I think we had a very clear idea that the piece was going ahead. And the script was in a totally different shape. But it was really, really important. That workshop turned out to be really, really vital in the way that Rona could then realise the piece. I think she learned an awful lot from not only speaking with the researcher that she'd been really, close to, and finding out a lot of detail from him. I think we all started to realise that it was going to be a tricky piece to send out, and that it had to be handled in a really delicate way for lots of reasons. Not only because we'd just come out of the pandemic, and we were all slightly, the first chance to be together. We were isolating, or we were separate. We had to keep our distance. We had to sit in a chair. It was a very, very distinctive workshop, and we were sitting in a circle. And it was very clear that how we were feeling as people, let alone actors, was really, really important, not only to Laurie but to Rona. And I think that helped to shape how we would start to tackle a piece, which is very front-footed and very bold, and deals with a lot of issues that a lot of folk don't want to talk about, or think they know what it's about, or want to talk about it and have very strong opinions about it. And so we had to, we all realised that we had to tread very carefully about that. And I think it was really helpful then to go on and do the piece, to have been part of that process. And I think at that point we realised that it had to be handled really carefully, even in the way that the text progressed, but also when we come into the point of working in the room, it had to be handled carefully.
I auditioned for it, and when I read the script, I was excited, shocked, and loads of emotions, because it was Rona Munro writing about Scottish history and a black story. And usually it's always a difficult thing for a white writer to write about black stories. So I was really interested reading it. And I think, and because a lot of this story is history, it's, you know, she's obviously added lots of drama to it, but the core of the story is history. I think she did a great job in making these women 3D complex characters that are just trying to survive. And my rehearsal process has been going through all the history that she sent us, because she sent us like a big information pack, doing my own research, and also working quite closely with Danielle, who plays Ellen, to try and figure out where we do fit in this James world. There was a point where me and Danielle were trying to figure out our relationship and why it was so vital and so close as friends or whatever. And then we were going through the subtext and we thought maybe it was more than just two women that are very close, that there actually was romantic feelings involved. And then we fed that back to Rona, and we were kind of like, Rona, do you think maybe? And she was like, yes, that's completely there. And then we fed that idea back to Laurie, and he was like, yes. So as soon as we started to play with different complex levels of intimacy, it just made those stakes a lot more believable, because I just couldn't understand why Ellen just couldn't get over the fact that we have to go our separate lives and we can still be friends, but we need to now accept our life in Scotland. I just could never understand that. And as soon as we broke through their sexuality and what it means to be attracted to women at that time, and as well as being attracted to men at that time, lots of other things started to unlock.
I think living in the court at that time would have its own complexity. And therefore, I think every situation that you come across in that court allows your character to be complex. And I think every time that we butt up against each other, we have age difference, race, gender, we have everything to deal with as we do in normal life. And I wonder if that may be something that sits quite well with a modern audience, that the complexities that they have are actually sort of shown within the piece itself. So I think it's quite easy to latch onto in that way. But I think Rona writes in a complex way, and also writes in a very front-footed and slightly upfront way. And I think that's why it appeals to an audience, a modern audience in particular. So I think there are both things going on, and to make that not appear obvious, I think you have to deal with it in a complex way.
I think if you look at the scenes where, like the rehearsal dinner and when Donald arrives, every night I love watching everyone else's reactions to what's going on, because they're still driving their story. And it's like in these court scenes, we all behave in one way, but underneath that is our wants, our needs, our desires, and all these conflicts, especially when there's that Archibald flight in. Dame Phemy is looking back to the Queen, and you're trying to figure out how to sort it out, and it's just there's so many
But
enjoyable
I think what's
things.
really lovely about that, and I think that's the really nice thing when you get a chance to play something night after night, is that the thing that you came into that scene with in rehearsals is nowhere near the thing that ends up on a night, and that'll change. You know, that'll continue to grow. And I think that's what's lovely about working in the theatre, is that every night you get a chance to play that exact moment, the moment that you know and you've rehearsed, and you know. But depending on how we all just come at that moment, it will change, and it will just. And if we're doing our job, we're listening to that, we're reacting to that, we're thinking that I've never seen that look before. So therefore, it allows us to fill in those characters and make them rounded and make them living and aware in the moment. And I think that that's what makes exciting theatre. I think if we're just there, you know, I see a line, you see a line, I see a line, you see a line, you know, I think it will soon fall on its backside.
So it was done in a way to make everyone as comfortable as possible. Personally, for me, I'm always uncomfortable with it, regardless. I could hear it a billion times, but that's just for me. For other people, they're able to go, oh, this is just that part of the play. And because we've had like chats, and I've spoke to Jairus, who's one of the directors, and personally I've had lots of support to deal with that, I've now got a little toolbox of how to deal with the poem when I'm backstage, when I have to hear it. But yeah, that's how I've dealt with it, and I think it was dealt with the right way. Because at the end of the day, we have a job, it's part of the play, but I did like that there was structures to make sure that we're able to do our job in a safe way. And I hope everyone else feels like that.
I think it came out of the workshop when originally it was Dunbar that read the poem, the complete poem. That day when we actually discussed the poem and how it made people feel was such an incredible session that I think at that point Rona perhaps wondered how it could be sent out. How could an audience actually hear that? How could, where would we start to send that out? And at that point, we all went away at lunchtime, and it was just a kind of a breakthrough moment of thinking, well, does this mean actually that we can't produce the piece? Because it felt like that. It did feel like that. And I suddenly had a thought that if it was owned by Ellen's character, if she owned it, would it then land in a totally different way? It's different if you're hearing it, but if you actually take it and say those words in a way that you go, all right, it then sent a kind of uncomfortable shiver around everybody. And I think at that point it was probably decided that it would be a helpful way of approaching it. Because, Dame Phemy is intrinsic in how that, Dunbar writes it, but she certainly, she could have taken that poem from Dunbar and said, I don't think it needs to be as strong as that. And she didn't. She went, yep, that works great, that's fantastic. Do you want to see it? Yep, there you are. You're going to have to do this. And she works up a whole routine as to why that poem has to get read out. Or something has to happen to change the situation. We need an heir, that's it. So she can work that out in her head. She's going, I'm doing this for the greater good. So she can give herself a reason as to why she thinks that's totally fine. And I think that that's a lot of the time how people go about their business. I think they think, well, I was doing it for other reasons, and I think it allows them to sit with feelings that most people go, oh, that's not nice. And it's the only way that I think I can get through doing the scene. And at one point, I think it was the second night at the Festival Theatre when we opened, and I suddenly, during the scene, I thought, oh, I wonder if Dame Phemy throws Dunbar under the bus, whether she turns around and she goes, that is horrific, that's so horrific to hear it. And she could easily have done that. And then Rona said, nah, she wouldn't let me. And I was going, but do you not think that she was going, nah, you can't get out of it, Blythe. Phemy can't get out of it. And I think it's right, and it really annoyed me, but I think it is right. I think and therefore now I've kind of gone on further with it, where I think she just thinks, what is all the fuss about? And the way that Dunbar says, it's just a joke. And she goes, yeah, come on, get over yourself. Which I think is a very modern response. And I think that that's why it continues to land with an audience in a way that they go, oh, I recognise that.
For Anne, it would be when her and Ellen have the big breakup argument where she says, you're not a child, Ellen. That's when Ellen is heartbroken, and she then decides to embrace the life of the court and the king and all that. And when Dame Phemy kicks Lady Anne out of the Queen's rooms after the baby dies, they're like two main points for me anyway, because at that point when I end it with Ellen, that's me choosing Queen Margaret, saying I'm sound over here, you need to do you, and I'm riding this high wave, I'm living with the Queen. And then when Dame Phemy switches my fate again, that's when I'm like, oh my God, I actually need Ellen. I need to figure out what to do, and my answers are with Ellen. So I'd say those two bits.
And the same for Phemy. I think she, as soon as she publicly says, you've never ever taken to me, and she sends Anne off, I think that for the audience is a moment of going, oh, all right, okay, we know we're playing with somebody different here, that she's going to have an influence in the way that the story plays out from here on in. I think that's a really pivotal point. And I think that then moves her into, and actually the scene we were talking about earlier, the dinner party, the rehearsal dinner scene, you know, at that point she thinks, oh, Dunbar's very good at catching this audience. I think that's when she sees entertainment and the way that that sits, and she thinks, that's helpful. And therefore she goes, right, okay, I know how to make this work. And I think that that's when you might not see it. I think you've said you spotted it, but I think that's when you see Phemy going. Because originally in the first couple of nights when we played it, I was just playing, this is a really important thing that Margaret is being completely undermined here, and I need to go and support her. But I suddenly realised, when does that thought come? It's very, very quick. She comes back in and she said to the Queen, I'm going to sort this. Comes back in and says to Dunbar, the Queen wants a word with you. The Queen doesn't even know what it is she's going to be saying to him. But she's manipulating, she's going, just go with me in this, we're going to play this situation. So I think she's constantly manipulating every situation that she can find. So I think that scene from the moment that she sends Anne out, I think she thinks, oh, back in. When she walks back into the rehearsal room, she's like that, yep, I'm here, remember me, I used to stand next to the Queen. And, you know, so I think she sees that as being, I'm back in again, I'm fine.
There's a moment where after the Culpo Almar speech, and after I speak to Donald Dhu, Lady Anne in the speech is going, I don't know what to do, I have to begin again, I don't want to. And then after she deals with Donald Dhu, she then decides, I'm going to ask for marriage. I'm going to knock myself a couple pegs down and marry a man. Yeah, so I would say those three.
There was a point in rehearsals where we were about to leave Glasgow to come through to Edinburgh to start to work, and we hadn't blocked anything out. We hadn't actually, said, you're going to stand here, you're going to enter here. That day we were going to do a kind of final read-through of the script. It was kind of like, if you want to, you can stand up when you're about to speak. And we did do that. And what it did was it made extraordinary moments that we hadn't even realised were in the piece. But the one standout moment of that was the scene with Anne and Donald Dhu, where Donald's speaking in Gaelic and you're speaking in Scots. But we stood up literally when we had to speak, and at that point, the beauty of what that scene was about, and it stripped back two people standing in a room in broad daylight. Just, you could have watched that, you wouldn't have had to see anything else, and it was mesmerising, and Rona's writing came to the fore at that point more than anything.
Her writing in that bit.
Yeah, it's just, it's exquisite, it's beautiful.
It's like delicious to say. It's satisfying.
Yeah, very satisfying to hear.
She's so good.